Demand and Supply is the title of the lecture. Usually people call it supply and demand, but it's true that we do demand before supply, so I expect that's why it's called Demand and Supply. So the purpose of the lecture is really to introduce the idea of a competitive market, to explore demand and explain the influences on demand, to explore supply and factors that affect supply, to put these two things together, supply and demand, in a supply and demand diagram, and then to think about things which change supply and or demand, and thereby to explain changes in prices and quantities. So everything in this topic hangs together very neatly. Now, I would just say that people often think that supply and demand analysis is an easy topic. It's the first topic that one does, first substantial topic that one does in an economics course like this. And I think lecturers maybe are often guilty of sort of waving their hands and saying, well, this is all pretty easy. I don't think that's right. I don't agree with that. I think there are lots of ways in which one can misunderstand supply and demand analysis. So I think it's worth going through it carefully and making sure that that doesn't apply to you. I'll try and emphasize the order in which you should do things, or how you should approach it, or at least it's my way of doing it, in the hope that we can avoid these common mistakes that people make. So if we're thinking about a market, it's not necessarily a stall on the Balham High Road. It's any arrangement which brings together buyers and sellers. So you can talk about, I often talk about markets of food like carrots, and then I am on the Balham High Road. But if you think about exchange rates, the buying and selling of foreign currency, let's say the dollar and the pound, that's a market, and that's a market that's not all located in the same, not located in one place, located in many places, but it's an interaction between buyers and sellers. So that's what we're thinking about. Perhaps one could say more about what a market is, but anyway, that will do for now. We're going to talk about highly competitive markets. So that's what we're thinking about. So really, we're thinking about markets where there are many suppliers and many demanders. So there are many producers of whatever it is, and there are many people who want to buy the good. Okay, we can have other kinds of arrangement, but that's where we start. So we need to think about demand and supply. Okay, so this slide contains more information than we need now, but since it's here, we'll discuss it. So I've said that there are many buyers and sellers. The assumption of homogeneous goods, there's a misspelling. There should be an E between the N and the O, the last one. That means the good is identical. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. But whatever it is we're talking about, let's say carrots, all the carrots are the same. There aren't higher grade carrots and lower grade carrots. If there are, they're different markets. We assume that well, buyers and sellers, but it's most important to think about sellers, suppliers, that they're price takers. So this is worth noting, and we come back to this later in the module. But what it means is that the suppliers don't set their own prices. They have to take the price which is determined by the market. So we will see that the forces of demand and supply interact with one another to determine the equilibrium price. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that's what we'll see. We'll see that the price is determined by the interaction of supply and demand. And what we're pointing out at this point is that suppliers don't set their own prices. They're not price setters. They take the price. They have to accept the price that's determined by the market. Okay, so that is worth noting. Okay, perfect information just means that there's no problem with people knowing things. Again, it's not important at this point to think about that too much. Neither is it important to think about freedom of exit and entry. That simply means that firms, suppliers can come and go easily. And I absolutely don't think that we need to worry about the next four. Okay, so let's just spin past those. Okay, we don't need those. Okay, so this slide is saying something about demand. So we all have wants. We have what are arguably unlimited desires or wishes. But when we demand something, then we've decided about which of our wants we want to try and satisfy. Okay, and that's going to depend in large part upon our income as well as upon our wishes. So there's a definition at the bottom. The quantity demanded of any good is the amount of the good that buyers are willing and able to purchase, and at each and every price level. Okay, so it's something to do with, we won't obsess about it, but it's something to do with buyers being willing and able to purchase something. And we're interested in the relationship between this demand and prices, the price of the good. So one of the most famous relationships in economics is the law of demand. And this is a very simple idea. And it's basically the idea, I'll read the quote in a minute. It's the idea that when the price of something goes up, the quantity demanded of it goes down, assuming everything else has been held constant. Okay, so if something becomes more expensive, then all other things equal, we expect the quantity demanded of it to decline. That's the law of demand. And it's drawn as a diagram, it's drawn as a demand curve, which we'll look at in a minute. So on this slide, that's the important information. What's the law of demand? Okay, to think about that. You can notice that there's a bit of Latin. So the Latin is ceteris paribus. That just means the rest staying the same. So it says in the quote, other things remaining the same. Ceteris paribus is just a fancy way of saying that. When the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded of the good decreases, and when the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded of the good increases. Ceteris paribus, everything else being held constant. Okay, that's the key information on this slide. The next bit immediately makes it a little bit more complicated. And I wouldn't, if it was my slide, it's a very good slide, but I wouldn't have introduced this now. But since it's here, I'll explain it. Okay, when the price changes, economists identify two different reasons which work with one another to cause an effect on the quantity demanded. The first is the substitution effect, and that's what you would have thought about in any case. It's just saying when something becomes relatively more expensive, you tend to move away from it towards something that has now become relatively cheaper. So the substitution effect is just the idea that if something becomes relatively more expensive, we tend to buy less of it. We tend to move away from that towards something that's now become relatively cheaper. Okay, so that's what that is. The income effect is something that you wouldn't think of naturally, but imagine that you're buying something that's a large component of your spending. So it's quite important to you. Okay, so you spend a lot of money on this item. When its price goes up, you feel worse off, right? Because you spend a huge amount of money on, I don't know, beer, right? And now the price of beer has gone up. You actually feel worse off. Economists would say your real income has declined. So if your real income, the purchasing power of your income has declined, that will also affect your demand for that good and also for other goods. So that's the so-called income effect. And usually the income effect is so small that you wouldn't notice. But if it was on an item where you spend a lot of your money on this item, when the price rises, your real income is lower, the purchasing power of your income is lower, and that would cause your demand to change, probably to go down. But in some cases, it could cause it to go up. In the case that's on the slide, normal good, it's going down. Don't worry about that for the time being. Just I've told you what the income effect is. If you didn't understand that now, it's okay. We'll come back to it, and it doesn't matter. The most important thing is the information that's encircled, well, not encircled, but with a line around it above. Okay, so this is thinking about the law of demand, but through the demand curve. So the demand curve is shown in the diagram, and in this case, it's the demand for energy drinks. Okay, that's just an example. And what you should notice is that on the vertical axis of the graph is the price per unit. So it says pounds per drink. So each drink in the possibilities that we're looking at can go from a price of nothing to a price of £3 per drink. So that's the scale of our graph, just an example. And on the horizontal axis is the quantity. So notice which way round the graph is. Prices on the vertical axis and quantities on the horizontal axis. And actually, that's the opposite way from what one might expect. Okay, so in this example, if the price is really low, so imagine we think about A, look at the table in A, if the price was 50p, then the demand for energy drinks in this market would be 9 million drinks per week. Okay, it's not only the quantity, but it's the quantity per unit of time, because obviously per week is different from per month. So yeah, really, strictly speaking, you have to say the quantity per time period. Okay, if the price were to go up to £1, then the quantity demanded would fall from 9 to 6. So B is another point on the demand curve. If the price were even higher, 150, then the quantity demanded would fall still further to 4. And that's point C on the graph. If the price is 2, the quantity demanded is 3. If the price is £2.50, the quantity demanded is 2, which is point E. Did I say that right? I hope. D was price of 2, quantity demanded 3, and E is the price is £2.50 and the quantity demanded is 2. But the important thing to see is that the demand curve is just a way of representing the law of demand. Okay, and it's drawn assuming everything else is held constant. So other factors will affect demand. Factors other than price will affect the quantity demanded. But for the time being, we're assuming that they're given, they're just fixed. Okay, so that's what a demand curve is. And you can have demand curves for individuals. So you could have a demand curve, let's say Chris's demand curve for energy drinks. That would be one person's demand curve, and we might have one of your demand curves for for energy drinks. But we're not looking at those here. We're looking at the demand curve across all consumers, let's say all consumers in the UK. So somehow those demand curves have been added together. Okay, that's easy to do, but it's not necessary to explain. So on the next slide, it's just getting you to think about the effect of a change in the price. So it's sort of reinforcing the idea. It says, well, it says what I said earlier. The market demand is the sum of all individual demands. Okay, fine. Let's move down. The law of downward sloping demand. When the price falls, the quantity demanded increases, all else constant, ceteris paribus, everything else held constant. Okay, so that's the arrows are supposed to emphasize that point. So if the price, suppose you started off at E and the price is 250, the demand is 2, quantity demanded is 2. If the price falls to 150, we move to point C, the quantity demanded has gone to 4, it's increased to 4. So it's trying to reinforce the idea that the demand curve is just another way of thinking about, or helps you think about, the law of demand. Right. So that's worth thinking about. So I'm speaking quite quickly, but just pause me and think about it if you need to.